Okay, so in this first video on the exchange rate, we're going to look at what do we mean by the exchange rate, and also what do we mean by this whole concept of a fall in the exchange rate, a rise, an appreciating, a depreciating exchange rate. So very simply, up until now in your economics course, you are going to have looked at the price of something, let's say apples or bananas or cars, and you said the price of something is measured in a pound. Now what we're saying is, what's the price of this pound? In other words, what's the value of a pound? And that pound there is valued in euros or yen or dollars. And so it's a bit of a switch in your thinking. And so effectively, what we would argue is that an exchange rate, okay, is the value of one currency, let's say a pound, but it's measured in terms of another currency. So it's another currency like a yen or a dollar or a euro. So it's measured in other currencies. And there's two ways in which you will see this illustrated in an exam. One is what we call the bilateral, lateral exchange rate, two things, okay? It says £1 is worth so many dollars, $1.80. £1 is worth so many euros. But as well as looking at how much a pound is worth, you've also got to be able to look at how much if a dollar is worth in terms of pounds. So we'll go through that because that's actually quite important as well. Okay. The other way in which they express it is, instead of saying, well, let's look at, what's happening to the pound against the dollar, we want to look at what the pound is doing against all exchange rates. And so you use this idea of a exchange rate index, or in this case it's a sterling exchange rate index. And all it is, it's a weighted average of the exchange rate, the pound against all currencies. So it's a pound against the dollar, pound against the euro, pound against the yen. And what is happening to it in terms of it going up or down, but it's not a simple average. It's not just take the average of all those numbers. It's a weighted average, and it's weighted in accordance with how much trade we do with the other country. Because obviously in the UK, roughly half or a bit more of our trade is done with Europe, and so the pound to the euro is going to be weighted at 50% because it's much more important than the pound to the Australian dollar, for example. Okay, all right. So there's two ways in which the pound can be measured. And let's look at the first thing, a fall now in the pound. Okay, a fall in the exchange rate. We call it a depreciation because the pound is now worth less in the other currencies. Okay, so in other words, if a pound was worth $2, it would depreciate. It'd only be worth $1.50. Okay, now as I say, you've also got to be able to compare the dollar to the pound. So in this case, if £1 was worth $1.50, then to get what $1 is worth, you would divide by 1.5. So you divide your pound by 1.5, and that would give you roughly 67p. So $1 is worth 67p. You must be able to switch those around in multi-choice work usually. Okay, all right. Depreciation, worth less, also known as a falling pound or a weak pound, i.e. over time it tends to go down in value. Sometimes they use the word devaluation. Strictly speaking, that should only be used for a fixed exchange rate system, okay, or a managed exchange rate system as well, which we will look at in one of the other videos. An appreciation of your currency means it's worth more, okay? In other words, if £1 was now worth $2, or was worth $2, and then it appreciates, it's now going to be worth $3. So for every one of my pounds, I can now buy $3, okay? If you're in the States, $1 is now worth, okay, a third of a pound, 33p, okay? So when the pound appreciates, the dollar weakens, and so they work opposite to each other. As I say, you've got to be able to work these things out. Appreciation is also known as higher or a strong pound. So over time, if the pound is strong and it's rising, it is known as a strong pound. And this next table is going to really be the one that you need to take a screenshot of and make sure you get this. Okay, so let me finish it completely before you do that. What we're talking about here is looking at a change in the exchange rate, okay, and then the value, I'll give you some examples, the price of exports and the price of imports, okay. So in this case here, the first thing that we're saying is, and always do this in the exam, give yourself easy numbers to work with. The value of my pound is $2. If I need to earn as an exporter £100, I simply have to sell my UK exports in an American market at $200. Okay, and we will always, when the value of the pound changes, we will always look at the change in the dollar price. Okay, there's going to be some effect on the quantity sold when that changes. Price of imports, let's say the importer needs to earn themselves $200 for their goods. They would be selling in my country at £100. So if £1 is $2, then how many dollars? $1 is half a pound, 50p. So we'll look at now at what happens if there's a fall in the exchange rate. And this is just the start, and the next videos are going to take this into much further detail. So a depreciation, a weaker, a falling, a devaluation means that instead of a pound is $2, it's now $1. That will mean that the price of my exports in America go down to $100. I can sell for $100, and every one I sell, I'm going to switch back at 1 to 2 and going to earn myself £100. So I'm going to sell more. The lower the price, the more I'm going to sell. And that's something we'll look at when we look at the effect on the balance of payments. But in terms of the imports, £100 they were selling because they wanted to get $200. Now they need to sell me imports at £200 because they need to switch those £200 here into the $200 that they need. So price of imports goes up, price of exports goes down. In terms of imports, we're going to hopefully cut the number of imports that we're going to sell. And in terms of how many dollars, in this case, can you see that instead of 50p to buy a dollar, I now need a pound to buy a dollar? That's going to be important when we look at the fact that some countries borrow in other currencies. So a lot of developing countries, they borrow in dollar-denominated debt. And so they've got to sell their currency to buy those dollars. That's why that's going to be important later on. The opposite, and there's many questions on the depreciation and the effect, which we'll look at in another video, but there's very few on the appreciating, so be ready for that, okay? This simply means that instead of a pound is $2, it's now $4. In other words, the price in America is going to go up to $400. That's the assumption we make in economics at the start. You can challenge that later on in evaluation. So as the price of my exports goes up, I'm going to sell less. As the price of my imports goes down, they're going to sell more. So there's going to be more imports and there's going to be less exports. And in this case, we only need to find 25p now to earn ourselves a dollar. So hopefully that gives you a really good start on what you would have to do to explain the first part of any analysis, explain the effect of a change in the exchange rate.